Researchers spent most of the 20th century seeking to understand how bodies fatigue. What gradually emerged was an idea of the human body as a machine, a highly complex one. Over time, scientists fine-tuned their models of endurance, the rationale being that if you understand how a machine works, you can calculate its ultimate limits. This came to a head in 1991 when Michael Joyner, an ex-collegial runner who was completing a medical residency at the Mayo Clinic, proposed a thought experiment. At that time, the limits of endurance running, according to physiologists, could be quantified with three parameters. Aerobic capacity, known as VO₂max, which is analogous to the size of a car's engine, running economy, which is an efficiency measure akin to miles per gallon, and lactate threshold, which can be compared to how long your engine can run at a high capacity before it overheats or seizes. Researchers had measured these variables in lots of elite runners, and those runners tended to have very good values in all three parameters and exceptional values in one or two. Joyner wondered what would happen if a single runner happened to have exceptional but humanly possible values in all three parameters. His calculations predicted that this runner would be able to complete a marathon in 1 hour, 57 minutes and 58 seconds. Now, we'll come back to that value, but let's unpack that idea of the body as a combustion engine. In reality, our bodies are actually more like electric cars, with each of our cells containing millions of tiny organic batteries between them. These batteries, which power all life on Earth, are called adenosine triphosphates, or ATPs. Each ATP consists of a tiny molecule, adenosine, attached to 3 molecules of phosphate, a phosphorus atom surrounded by oxygen atoms. These 3 phosphates are bound to each other in a chain, and the chemical arrangement of these bonds stores potential energy that can be released when ATP is broken down. When the final phosphate group is removed by hydrolysis, the entire system shifts to a lower energy, more stable configuration, releasing usable energy along with one hydrogen ion and leaving behind adenosine diphosphate, or ADP. This liberated energy powers almost everything done by every cell in the body. It fuels the chemical reactions needed for nerve signals, organ function, muscular contraction, and much more. Like the battery in an electric car, ATP is rechargeable. By breaking down chemical bonds in sugar and fat molecules, cells harvest energy that is used to restore ADP back to ATP. Now, despite their important role, ATP molecules are not actually stored in large quantities. You see, maintaining a very high concentration of ATP would disrupt cellular metabolism, and also the body can generate ATP extremely quickly. Humans resynthesize our entire body weight in ATP each day, so there's no need to store it this way. The amount available at any one moment is tiny, only enough to power maximal muscular work for a second or two. So as soon as exercise begins, ATP turnover must accelerate dramatically. Let's imagine how this plays out during different race distances up to a marathon. The first energy production process is called the phosphagen system. It provides the first short, sharp burst of energy. During a 10-meter race, our muscle cells contain just enough ATP to power the first few rapid contractions. After this very brief window, our leg muscles begin relying heavily on a molecule called creatine phosphate, or phosphocreatine, PCR, which rapidly donates phosphate groups to ADP to regenerate ATP. These stores too are limited, becoming substantially depleted within about 10 seconds of maximal sprinting and largely exhausted within 30. But that first 100 to 200 meters where you relied on the phosphagen and PCR systems gives your body the time it needs to accelerate another energy recharging process that involves breaking down sugar. Sugar, a simple form of carbohydrate, can be used to recharge ATPs through a process called glycolysis, from glyco for sugar and lysis for breakdown. During glycolysis, enzymes cleave sugar molecules in half, liberating the energy from their chemical bonds to charge 2 ATPs. This approach doesn't require oxygen and is rapid enough to provide almost half the energy used during a 30-second sprint. But there's a catch. During glycolysis, the leftover halves of each sugar, molecules known as pyruvates, accumulate faster than mitochondria can fully process them. As pyruvate accumulates, the cell converts it into lactate. Now, this step is often misunderstood. Lactate is actually a harmless and really useful energy-rich molecule that is shuttled to other tissues and eventually oxidized to produce more ATP. Its formation actually helps maintain biochemical balance inside the cell. The burning sensation, though, felt during intense exercise, does not come from lactate. Instead, the acidity rises largely from the breakdown of ATP itself during high force contractions. As muscles work harder, the hydrolysis of ATP and associated accumulation of hydrogen ions outpace the body's ability to buffer them, making the environment more acidic. The result is the familiar sense of fatigue and reduced contractile function. Within about 30 seconds of sprinting, your legs will feel as if they are burning. It then takes a lengthy period of time to gradually buffer the acidity and shuttle the surplus lactate into the slower, long-term aerobic energy processes. Now, oxygen is a necessity if you want to run for extended periods. Again, it all comes down to a question of efficiency. I had mentioned that during glycolysis, your body can yield 2 ATPs from a single molecule of sugar. This is fine for a short burst of energy, but sometimes your body needs to go for longer, like running a marathon, or to fuel an endurance hunt. Aerobic metabolism, where you use oxygen to fully oxidize a molecule of sugar, yields far more ATP, typically around 28 to 32 molecules, depending on the tissue type and conditions. The trouble with aerobic metabolism is that it can't deliver energy as quickly because it requires a long sequence of steps and an army of enzymes to function. These steps occur within specialized structures in your body's cells that I mentioned briefly before, called mitochondria, which are capable of oxidizing not only the pyruvates that come from sugar, but also fats and, in emergencies, proteins. So your aerobic energy system will kick in when you start exercising, but the energy it yields isn't available in full until you start getting into those longer distances. But the maximum level of energy that you can obtain through aerobic metabolism varies from person to person. We all have a limit. This is an important concept termed maximal oxygen uptake, or VO₂max. Your VO₂max reflects your aerobic limits, the maximum rate at which your heart, lungs, and muscles can effectively use oxygen during exercise. Many wearable sensors, like GPS running watches, use different prediction algorithms to estimate your VO₂max, but the gold standard approach involves going to a physiology lab. There, you would be fitted with a mask connected to a machine that measures oxygen consumption while you run on a treadmill or cycle a bike. As your speed increases, your oxygen demands go up. At some point, though, your oxygen consumption plateaus despite the increasing speeds. At this limit, your VO₂max, your legs demand energy at a rate that aerobic processes can't match, so you have to draw on fast-burning, anaerobic, or without oxygen energy sources like glycolysis. The end of the ordeal is close in this scenario because speeds above this range can't be sustained as muscles become more and more acidic due to an accumulation of hydrogen ions. Your muscles' ability to tolerate high levels of acidity, what we would now call your anaerobic capacity, is the other key determinant of endurance in events lasting less than about 10 minutes. Your lactate threshold then is the intensity of exercise that causes lactate to accumulate in the blood at a faster rate than it can be removed. It essentially defines the border between an activity being predominantly aerobic or substantially anaerobic. It too is an important threshold and varies from person to person. Now, practically speaking, your VO₂max doesn't have much of an effect on the speed you can attain during short, maximum intensity bursts like that 100-meter sprint, but the longer the distance, the more it matters. For a 100-meter sprint, only 10% of your energy comes from aerobic respiration, but that percentage increases to 30% over 400 meters, 60% for 800 meters, and around 80% for a mile. The farther you go, the more your maximum speed benefits from a high VO₂max, and this plays out in elite athletes. Your typical moderately fit male, weighing about 80 kilos, would have a VO₂max of between 50 to 60 milliliters per kilo per minute. A well-trained recreational athlete might hit the mid-60s, with the elites in the 70s and 80s and beyond. Now, there used to be a perception stemming from that man as machine idea I started with, that VO₂max was the key physiological variable in running performance. The problem with this idea is that for distances beyond about 5k, runners don't actually use this maximum amount. They run at submaximal levels. Elite 10,000 meter races are run at about 90% of VO₂max, and elite marathons at between 80 and 90%. So while having a high VO₂max is important, there are other factors to consider, and this has been demonstrated in studies where increasing levels of VO₂max are not uniformly associated with improvements in performance. One such factor that I've already mentioned is your lactate threshold. Physiologists have known since the 1970s that lactate threshold, the fastest speed you can maintain without triggering a dramatic rise in blood lactate levels, is a very accurate predictor of marathon time. That's why Michael Joyner incorporated it into his equation for the sub 2-hour marathon, along with a third variable known as running economy. Running economy is a measure of how much oxygen a runner uses for a given submaximal speed. In theory, two runners can have the same VO₂max, and then the one who is more economical at submaximal speeds is likely to be faster over longer distances. Running economy is defined as the total volume of oxygen needed to run 1 kilometer. For well-trained runners, this total tends to remain relatively stable across a range of moderate running speeds. So in other words, if you are an elite or relatively experienced recreational runner, regardless of how fast you run within that moderate range, you use more or less the same volume of oxygen to cover the same distance. Now, there are exceptions. Some runners become more or less efficient as they run faster. Biomechanics, fatigue, and neuromuscular coordination all influence this, but the general principle holds for most trained individuals. This is where confusion often arises. You see, the faster you run, the more oxygen you use per minute, but the amount you use per kilometer remains roughly constant within that range, because you are simply compressing that oxygen use into less time. Take an athlete running at a pace of 4 minutes per kilometer. Let's say he is using about 200 milliliters per kilo of oxygen to run that kilometer. If we look at his oxygen use per minute, we can calculate that he is using 50 milliliters per kilo per minute of oxygen, because it takes him 4 minutes to run that kilometer and use those 200 milliliters per kilo of oxygen. Let's say our runner increases his speed to 3 minutes per kilometer. We can assume that he still needs about 200 milliliters per kilo of oxygen to run that kilometer. If we look at his oxygen use per minute, we can calculate that he is using 67 milliliters per kilo per minute. But the key point remains. The use of oxygen per minute goes up with running speed, but the use per kilometer remains relatively constant. He is still using 200 milliliters per kilo of oxygen, just over less time. Now, we've touched on the ways our bodies have evolved compared with our ape cousins to make us more efficient, particularly as runners. But within our species, there are certain anthropometric features that are associated with better running economy. I had mentioned previously how neuromuscular coordination during gait, subtle movements of our legs, arms and trunk in different planes, helps create a smooth undulating trajectory of our center of mass. Well, people with better running economy tend to have a lower vertical oscillation of the center of mass. They also tend to move their arms less and have more flexed knees during the swing phase of running gait. Their stride length tends to be optimized to the dimensions of their own body, so not too long or too short. Optimal stride length is something your body tends to settle on as you become more experienced as a runner, although some runners deliberately try to increase their cadence by reducing their stride length. Based on what we know, this can actually worsen running economy in many runners. When it comes to height, men who are slightly shorter than average tend to have better running economies, although the reverse is true in women. In terms of overall physique, those with an ectomorphic build and those with lower body fat percentages tend to have the best running economy, because more body fat means more mass, increasing the oxygen cost of running. People with better running economy usually have a narrower pelvis, smaller than average feet, and a leg morphology where more of the limb's mass is closer to the hips. Within those legs, the muscle fibers themselves vary. At one extreme are slow twitch fibers that do not contract rapidly or powerfully, but use energy aerobically. They don't fatigue easily. These type 1 fibers contrast with the fast twitch type 2 fibers, which themselves come in two variations in humans. Type 2X fibers that burn sugar to generate powerful and rapid forces but fatigue quickly, and type 2A fibers that produce moderately powerful forces aerobically and thus fatigue at an intermediate rate. Type 2A fibers are best for medium intensity activities like racing a mile, type 2X fibers for bursts of extreme power like sprinting 100 meters, and type 1 fibers, because they are associated with lower energetic costs and better fuel efficiency, for long distance events like the marathon. And that brings us back to Michael Joyner's 1991 prediction of just under 1 hour and 58 minutes. The prediction only involved 3 inputs: VO₂max, lactate threshold, and running economy. But here's the problem with the man is machine idea. In it, every machine has a maximum capacity, and if elite athletes are indeed at the limits of that capacity, Why then are there so few deaths in endurance sport? And why do we so often see a finishing spurt where athletes who appear to be on the edge of complete fatigue can suddenly summon one last effort? This points us toward a different interpretation of fatigue, one that involves regulation rather than pure mechanical failure. Instead of a rigid mechanical limit, it suggests a system in which the brain continuously evaluates effort, discomfort and the environment, and also motivation, adjusting the output accordingly. It raises the possibility that what we perceive as the limit may not always reflect the absolute physiological ceiling, but rather the point at which multiple systems collectively decide that we should not go further, at least not yet. We'll explore that idea in the next lecture.